ever just looked up at a plane, cruising miles above your head, and really thought about what it's carrying? Yeah, sure, there are passengers and luggage, but the real cargo? An incredible, mind-boggling amount of fuel. In a lot of ways, it's not just an airplane, it's a flying fuel tank. All right, let's just get into this, because that number is wild, right? A modern jetliner is hauling around the energy equivalent of 1,000 lightning bolts. So the challenge isn't just about using that power, it's about keeping it all safe while solving some seriously tricky engineering problems. We're talking about massive weight, a delicate balancing act, and of course, the constant risk of it all going boom. So let's start with the most basic problem of all. You've got all this fuel you need to carry, but where in the world do you put it? The sheer amount we're talking about is just staggering. Check this out. The special Airbus A350 that's being built for Qantas's Project Sunrise flights. It can hold over 170,000 liters of jet fuel. To put that in perspective, that's enough gas to fill up more than 3,000 cars. A massive chunk of a plane's weight at takeoff is nothing but fuel. So that's the big question, isn't it? Where do engineers possibly find the room for that much liquid? You can't just compromise the plane's structure or mess with its aerodynamics. The solution they came up with is, frankly, brilliant. Well, here's the crazy part. It's not hidden in some separate tank or container. The wings themselves, they are the fuel tanks. It's an incredibly elegant solution that uses space that's already there, turning a huge part of the plane's structure into one big fuel reservoir. And this has a name, of course. It's called a wet wing. See, instead of putting a flexible bladder or some kind of separate tank inside the wing, the engineers just seal the wing's internal structure itself to make it totally fuel-tight. The jet fuel is literally sloshing around in direct contact with the wing's skin and internal skeleton. Now, like any good engineering solution, this design is all about trade-offs. On one hand, using a wet wing saves a ton of weight and makes the most of the available space. But the downside? It's incredibly complex. Every single rivet, every bolt, every little panel that goes into that wing has to be sealed perfectly. And that sealant has to survive huge temperature swings and being soaked in fuel for years. Over time, it breaks down, which makes finding and fixing leaks a really difficult and expensive job. Okay, so we figured out where to store the fuel. Great. But that just creates a whole new problem. How do you manage hundreds of thousands of pounds of liquid that's constantly sloshing around and being used up without completely throwing the plane off balance? This is where you get to see what is basically the aircraft's circulatory system. And trust me, what you're seeing here is a highly simplified look at the system on an Airbus A321. It is this incredibly complex maze of tanks, pumps, and valves, all run by computers, to keep that aircraft perfectly, and I mean perfectly, balanced from takeoff to landing. And the fuel gets used in a very specific order. First, the plane drains the center tank, the one in the main body. Then it starts pulling from the inner parts of the wing tanks, and only at the end of the flight does it use the fuel from the outer tips of the wings. Now, why do that? Well, by keeping all that weight out in the wings for as long as possible, the mass of the fuel itself actually pushes down, counteracting the forces of lift that are trying to bend the wings upwards. Think of it like carrying a heavy tray of drinks. You take a sip from the glasses in the middle first to keep everything stable, right? Same idea. So let's talk about the tools that make this all happen. There are basically two main types of pumps doing all the work. You've got your big, powerful centrifugal pumps. Those are the workhorses with moving parts that feed the engines. But then, to move fuel between the tanks, they often use these really clever things called jet pumps. They have no moving parts at all. They just use the pressure from the main pumps to create a suction effect that siphons fuel from one place to another. Super smart design. All right, so we've stored the fuel and we're managing its balance. Now for what is without a doubt the most critical problem of all. How do you prevent a catastrophe? See, liquid jet fuel is actually pretty stable. The real danger is the vapor it creates in the empty space of a tank, what engineers call the ullage. That stuff can be explosive. That danger became terrifyingly real back in 1996 with the tragic loss of TWA Flight 800. The plane exploded in midair because the fuel vapor in its center wing tank ignited. That disaster was a massive wake-up call for the entire industry, and it led the FAA about a decade later to mandate much, much tougher safety rules for everyone. The investigation by the NTSB came to a chilling conclusion. They said that any design that just tries to get rid of all the possible sparks is, and I'm quoting here, fundamentally flawed. History had shown it's impossible to predict every little thing that could cause a spark. A totally new way of thinking was needed. You have to assume a spark could happen, and then design a system that makes sure the tank still can't explode. So this new philosophy led to two main solutions. The first is what's called an inerting system. It basically pumps nitrogen-rich air into the tank, which pushes out the oxygen and makes the fuel vapor impossible to ignite. The second approach is to use something like a special polyurethane foam to fill the tank. If a spark does happen and the vapor ignites, the foam immediately contains that tiny flame front, suppressing the pressure wave and preventing a big, catastrophic explosion. So, you take all of this incredible technology, the wet wings, the complex balancing computers, the advanced safety systems, and you push every single bit of it to the absolute limit. And why? To enable the next leap forward in air travel. 22 hours. Just think about that for a second. That's the planned duration for the longest non-stop commercial flights ever. A single journey that's going to require an airplane to be an almost perfectly engineered, ultra-endurance flying fuel tank for nearly an entire day. This incredibly ambitious goal has a fitting name, Project Sunrise. It's Qantas's plan to directly connect Sydney on Australia's east coast with London and New York. These are routes that, for a long time, were thought to be basically impossible without a stop. It's going to require a very special, heavily modified aircraft. And that aircraft is a special version of the Airbus A350-1000, the ultra-long-range model. And you can really see the difference right here. Its fuel capacity is significantly boosted compared to the standard version, and that's all thanks to some really clever engineering changes. So how'd they do it? Well, Airbus actually integrated a permanent 20,000-liter extra tank into the back of the fuselage. Of course, all that extra fuel means more weight, so they had to reinforce the landing gear to handle it. They also tweaked the aerodynamics of the wing to make it more efficient, and they upgraded the fuel management software to handle the even more complicated job of balancing the plane over a flight that lasts almost a full day. It's just an incredible story of innovation when you think about it. It all started with the simple problem of where do we put the fuel, and evolved into these hyper-complex systems that manage balance, safety, and efficiency. These flying fuel tanks have connected our world in ways we could have only dreamed of a century ago. It really makes you wonder, what new frontiers will the next generation of this technology unlock?
Dreaming of flying across the world? Not just India, but Paris, London, Dubai. An EASA license is your passport to global skies. Recognized in 31 countries and accepted by airlines wide. Train in Europe with modern aircraft, multicultural exposure, and the world's highest safety standards. And yes, you can always convert back to DGCA if you choose to return. Confused about costs, universities, or visa process? We're here to help for free. Hurry! Click the link below to register for your free one-on-one consultation today. Limited seats available. Your global cockpit awaits.